One, two, three.
Welcome to Scéalta, and my name is Joe Austin. And for those who are just joining, Scéalta is a joint production of Fáilte Fiasta here in Phobail. We also want to thank the Connolly Centre for allowing us to make this programme here. Can I take the opportunity of welcoming you all and giving you all greetings from the Connolly Centre and a happy St Patrick's Day from Colin and me. And I hope you're enjoying it, behaving yourself, and I hope that you are taking all the necessary precautions that you need to take to stay safe. So my guest this evening is Colin Harvey, Professor Colin Harvey, to give you part of your full title.
So-called Professor?
Well, I think you're a very impressive Professor. You're Professor of Human Rights Studies at the Law School at Queen's, is that right? Now, I know you have another dozen titles, and I know you're quite modest about those titles. I have to say, as an observation, you don't look like a professor.
I'm sure there's many people would agree with you in terms of that, but I very much, Professor in the Law School at Queen's. I've actually worked, elsewhere as well, at the University of Leeds in England too, And
Oxford?
I taught at the summer school in Oxford there in human rights and other places, but, like a lot of academics, academic life can be quite transient, so you can move around quite a bit, and I've done that, and I've been very lucky and fortunate to do that. But yeah, human rights law, constitutional law has been where really I've been focused.
If I was to list the papers that you have published or contributed to, or your own publications, we would be here for the rest of the programme. I wouldn't have any other room for anything else.
We'd also send everybody to sleep as well.
Well,
so
I don't know about that. I don't know about that. I think sometimes academia is a strange world for people, especially working class people, unfortunately, still to this day. And it's good to get an insight into it. You're by birth a Derry man?
Yeah, I am indeed. But it's something I want to take you back to what you've just said, in terms of, because thinking about Derry in my own context as well, and growing up, academia and that world, and the world that I've been in, I never felt part of the club either,
Really?
So in a sense, I do empathise with people who find these, worlds difficult. And very much, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can make universities and other places, a bit more accessible to people, that we don't just, sit in libraries and do what we do, but we also go out and speak to people as well. So I think it's an important part of our role as a university to try and engage with communities, make sure we're open to communities, that people feel welcome there, and also we explain what we do as well. So.
Was there always going to be a professor? Was that your destiny, or what kind of a background growing up? What did you?
No, I don't. One of the things you're tempted to do, like I'm 51, right? So
a very young looking 51.
I'm feeling older.
You've just done the marathon today.
No, is really there's a temptation to retrofit your life, right?
Okay.
And to have this sort of narrative arc of, but actually, like everyone else, if you had told teenage self that I'd have ended up where I ended up, I wouldn't have believed you. Like everybody else, you sort of stumble along and you end up in a certain place. But I think ultimately, what people talk about purpose and values and all that, and you don't want to overplay that either, but was very, very motivated by, and I don't say this lightly, the sort of Derry context. And where I was from, we very much grew up with a sense, with the civil rights message ringing in our ears. Like me and my own parents, neither of them are with us anymore, had a real sense of, that sense of being second class in your own city, and that sense of injustice sort of was always there. But, if I was going to say I had it, when I was 12, I decided I didn't. And to get there, and I suppose there's a lesson really for anybody really watching or listening to, like, you find your own path, those people who are putting you under pressure when you're a teenager, decide now what you want to do, you'll find your own way. But I think the purpose thing and the values that I sort of inherited were a big influence on my life. But like everybody else, it was as chaotic as anybody else's life, So
we spy on you before we interview you. You probably have discovered that. Okay. And I was speaking to a friend who may not be a friend after this is broadcast. Right. And I was asking him about you. Although I've known you quite a while, I've never had an opportunity like this. But I was asking him, you know, are you a serious person?
Yeah.
And I want to talk about the girls, your own daughters,
yeah.
briefly later on. And he said, he's very, very clever. He's very bright. Were you always very clever and very bright, or was this something that you had to work for, or was it, I don't mean were you a gifted child, did you find that studying that leads you on this path to where you are now?
Well,
was it hard for you?
I categorically reject the accusation of being clever and whatever, you know.
Okay.
I don't think, I suppose a way of answering that would be, like I'll explain that my parents, you know, I was brought up in Carnhill in Derry, which is the sort of, you know, social housing council estate in Derry. We moved a bit down to Conley in later life, and I went to university in England. Like I left Derry to go to university in England, and I suppose that my response to that would be really that I have no more potential than anybody else where I grew up. I was fortunate, I was lucky, and I got breaks and people helped me along the way. But I think the tragedy of the place that we live and the conditions that people live in is that not everybody gets lucky and not everybody is fortunate. So rather than say that I'm not, what I'd say is I was fortunate, lucky, and people helped me along to find the path that I'm on now. But the tragedy here, the tragedy in the society for many young people growing up is the way our society is structured, they don't get that opportunity. So I think ultimately it's, I was fortunate, I feel lucky and privileged, and I also want to acknowledge the fact that along my journey and path in life, people helped, you know, and I want to do that in return, to acknowledge that. Yeah, but also one of the things that really, like I'm heavily involved in the human rights debate here, Bill of Rights and all that, which can seem abstract, but it's really about ensuring that children growing up not far from where we are now get chances, you know, to fulfill the potential that they already have, but is denied them. So I just got lucky.
I had the privilege of listening to you in this building a few weeks ago, and you were taking part in a discussion, not a debate, a discussion, and it was about post-Brexit. But there was a quotation that you threw out to the audience, and I want to just bring it to you. And you said that human rights is an everyday experience. It's not an academic experience. I don't even know why you remember saying that, but and part of what you're suggesting there in terms of human rights for everyone, education for everyone, fairness for everyone, is very much part of that. So the question matched where you're from, Derry, and that democratic deficit that Derry has witnessed, as we all have witnessed, but Derry in particular. Was that why you chose to study in human rights? Were they linked?
I was just always very, very driven from very, very young age, politically. You know, and I'm not, in some sense, I'm not retrofitting that. I just remember annoying members of my own family very much growing up in terms of just being. And I think there's something about that real profound sense that's here of injustice, right? And people not being treated with dignity and respect, people being like humiliated, right, for who they are and what they wanted to achieve, and being denied opportunity. Like, I always remember, even like in the schooling system that we were in, that we, and I use we very, very consciously, there was a purpose and meaning to our lives. And I don't say that just as an individual, and that sounds very over the top, but that we had a responsibility to do something about that in the longer term. Now again, I go back to the earlier point, I'm not retrofitting my life. I was as all over the place as any teenager or any young 20-year-old trying to work out what I want to do in my life, but that sense sort of propelled me to where I wanted to go. I didn't just want to walk away from all that. I wanted to do something about it, and it didn't manifest itself just in relation to, you know, the North or Ireland. Like I did my PhD on refugees and asylum seekers because, you know, I was looking at what was happening in Britain in the 90s, the way people were being treated appallingly, and I wanted to do something about that because, you know, human rights, that, you know, the clues in the title, they're about everyone, whatever, and often, you know, migrants, displaced people, refugees, asylum seekers, you know, the way that they're treated then by an appallingly reactionary Conservative government at
Cruel,
the time.
cruel government.
Obviously, that's not changed radically
No,
since then.
no,
but,
not yet.
it's just to stand up for people whose dignity was denied, having come from a place where I saw that happen to other people. And my community and where I grew up, I'm
Walter Mackin, the Irish writer, the Irish author, talked about you can take the man from the bog, but not the bog from the man. And it wasn't the bog said that he was referring to. Although you've lived in Belfast, do you lament leaving Derry? It's not that far away, of course, but are you still a Derry man at heart, or are you kind of assimilating with this big city of Belfast?
Oh no, I've completely, obviously sold out, you know. And, I know
you can't go back now after saying that.
No, you never. I'm very, very proud of where I'm from, and I'm very proud of Derry and its people and what the whole city has gone through. And you know, I was up there recently for the 50th anniversary Bloody Sunday Memorial, and I, did the walk, and just to be in part of something really bigger than yourself. And there's always that sense of Derry that you're part of something bigger than the city you're from, that Derry represents something about the place that we're in. It was a sort of site of struggle, a site of civil rights struggle, and that's all unfinished business, in a sense. It's not work that's over, particularly for Derry, and I know Derry people get a hard time about saying it, but there's a lot of truth, and the way Derry has been treated symbolises the deep structural problems with the place that we live, and so I'm very, very committed to, keeping on that work of changing, even though I have fundamentally sold out and live and work in Belfast.
Well, Belfast will, of course, welcome you. Derry may never forgive you, but I mean that's
I seek
up to them.
forgiveness from Derry. Yeah.
You talked about university in England, the going away from Derry, being there.
Yeah.
Was university, was it socially difficult and academically hard for you, or did you just fit into student life?
I find it difficult in terms of no real experience of anybody going to university, and it's why I said earlier about a chaotic life. If you ask me how did I end up where it was, just it happened. You went through A levels, sort of ended up, was wanted to experience elsewhere. So I had a very profound sense of that. But I know I found university in England very difficult. The first 3 months, I was never off the phone to my ma, who was constantly sort of saying to me, "Oh, come home." But I sort of, I stuck it out, and I went and did a PhD. I worked in Wales, and then ended up back here. I worked in Leeds, so I've been around it a bit. My wife is from North Devon in England, which often sometimes I reflect on that when I think about some of the things that get said about me and assumptions that people make about your life. I've engaged with people all across these islands for the last nearly 30 years in academic life. But yourself in this place, there's a lot of stereotype and there's a lot of caricature, particularly if you get engaged in some of the constitutional debates as well. People think they can just
pigeonhole you. Well, I'm going to do just that.
Yeah.
I'm going to pigeonhole you, and I'm going to quote from somebody who, again, will no longer be your friend if I divulge who they are.
I'm losing friends.
And the reason I asked you the question about university was because of a sense that they said that you have an ability to identify with a person. That was a bit of class. They were talking about students who is the odd person out, or who's the person that doesn't fit in, or the person. Is that a fair assessment of you, that you have this sense of, like somebody is maybe not part of the group, but you can relate to them?
It's interesting you mentioned, because just at maybe the stage I'm at in life in the last, you do think back, and again, there's a temptation to try and retro your life. And
don't retro, just answer the questions. You're being the professor now.
But no, I think that I've always tried to, not just verbally, but stand with anybody who's being humiliated, dignity is being denied, and who are marginalised and vulnerable. I'm not overstating that. There's much more I could do in life around all of that, but I've always tried to do what I can. My heart will always be with the person who's not in the room, right? With the person who is just who is not treated with respect, and to try and work out how we can remedy that. tangibly as well, you know, not just sort of rhetorically. I think that I'm trying to use the things that I think I can do reasonably well to try and highlight that.
You see, that would be for many people, especially working class people, slightly an alien experience, because for many of us who weren't the brightest pupil in the class, they were the people who were kind of shunted to the side, and teaching became how you develop the talented and push the less talented to the side. So the reason that I'm asking you that is because it's an observation that somebody else has about you, and sometimes we don't always identify with these observations until they're pointed out to us. And so I want to ask you about fitting into Queen's academic life, but before that, you came from Derry, you're in England, you're having a student life. After you get over your loneliness, you're having a student life. Did you ever, and I know you have been back and forward and we've talked about Oxford and stuff, but was there ever a point in time where you said, I'm staying here, I'm not going back to that madhouse, the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland or the six counties? Were you ever tempted to settle in England?
I think the answer is no, for a number of reasons. One reason is I remember when I was working in Leeds, I sort of had this sense that I could live my entire life here anonymously and nobody would know or whatever, and I'd do my thing. And what I like about here, and also fits with my own sort of work and my own personal views, opinions, is that there's an engagement here that you don't find elsewhere. You can be very much engaged with communities here, that the university isn't an abstract entity that's very much, often the university finds itself at the heart of some fairly heated discussions. But to be fair, you know, all the universities here are engaged in the wider community, so I'm very much motivated in that. Like, I've spent a lot of my life involved with NGOs and civil society organisations. I don't think you can teach human rights law and just leave it in the classroom. You know, you have to be about, and I found working with civil society organisations here and on the island really generally to be tremendous. I've learned a lot from doing that. So and ultimately just, you know, wanted to be in Ireland, you know, but I must say the experience of being elsewhere I found incredibly beneficial. And I want to say, like, one of the tragedies about the conversation is that you know, we want good relationships across these islands, you know, and if there are ways of helping each other as well. I met many people in England who, for example, involved in progressive politics in England, who wanted, you know, who are mortified by what's happening now, for example, in terms of London, who want to be part of a change there. So I think it's a misunderstanding about what people are advocating here, which is that you want change on the island of Ireland, but there's always going to be relationships across these islands. You want them to be good, but that this island wants to take its own mind and go in a different direction, I think is one of the tragedies, really. Tell me
a wee bit about this, about the poor woman that you brought from Devon into this to the north. I know you're very private, but you know, was it a hard sell to get her to come to here, given all the reputation that we had earned or otherwise?
No, obviously I can't speak for her. Lisa will be mortified of me raising this or whatever, and having said that,
we won't tell her.
But it's interesting, you know, in terms of, because we met at university in 1990.
Yeah.
And if you think about it from Lisa's perspective of, you know, coming from university in Lancaster, north of England, coming from Devon, and, you know, arriving in Derry, because we spent a lot of time in Derry. But
I wouldn't come if I was her. I wouldn't have came.
And I think so. But what interests me both ways, like, I very much incredible part of the world in Devon, so I enjoy going there. But was how much, you know, Lisa's family enjoyed coming here, you know, and, you know, traveling around and, you know, being part. So obviously challenging enough discussions to be having, but actually I think Lisa would say more than me, you know, in a sense that very much part of this. She now has her Irish citizenship and things like that, so it's part of it. But I suppose it's one of the things. You can tell this is excruciating, by the way, in terms of talking about this stuff. In terms of
what I can tell is you're picking your words very carefully.
But it does annoy me about, it's back to our earlier conversation about caricature and stereotype. Like, I've never really spoken out loud about some of this stuff before, but you know yourself, in terms of the debates that are going on here at the moment, you know, people have no idea who I am, you know, and they just, in some of the conversations around Queens, because I've taken positions that I've taken and I have no intention of resigning from them, you know, they make accusations against you. Think, do they even know? You know, I spent most of my life, you know, in a relationship with a woman from North Devon in England, you know, and all of that, you know. So I just think, I wonder sometimes.
Well, it's dismissal prior to investigation.
Yeah.
And it's if it's any consolation, it isn't you personally, it's what people think you represent. And you're right, and it can be infuriating. I want to return to that, but I want to try and give people the sense of you. Yeah. And I know you're very private about your family, and I'm skirting as round as
There's no going back now.
No, your divorce proceedings, as soon as this goes out, you're getting through out the door. You're back in Ireland, you're back in Belfast. Are you immediately at Queen's, or was there a break before you came in and went into work in Queen's?
I suppose the most recent, I was came back here 2005. I was here from 97 to 2000. Got a chair at Leeds, and then came back again. So there's a bit of to and froing, but been here now for what, that's 17 odd years, in terms of. So you know, been here for a while now in terms of and seen you know a lot of what's happened over the last number of years. Here. Did
you find Queen's is like I suppose like us all. I mean, it's evolution, it's change, and maybe not changing quick enough, and maybe not doing the things that we think it should do. But nevertheless, when you're a bright-eyed academic, you're whether you like to acknowledge it or not, you're good at your job, you're clever, you've been around that world. Was Queen's a stuffy place for you? Was it somewhere that you thought, you know, I can progress here, I can challenge or look at some of the things that I think need to be looked at? Or was it just fit in and don't say a word?
I think the university has, it's a good question, you know, in terms of thinking about Queen's. Queen's itself, I think, has changed a lot, you know, over the years. I think I found it, you know, it's a great community of academics really who are thinking about difficult things. And I suppose the big one that I like about, and like then still like now, is that in the law school, most of my academic colleagues, they don't just write about things in articles, they're very, very engaged in what's happening here. In fact, many of them are, you know, in terms of the whole peace process, going back to the agreement, many of the mechanisms, whether it's the justice mechanisms, the human rights mechanisms, the assembly mechanisms, are very, very involved in all that, you know. So what I enjoy about Queen's and the law school particularly is that, you know, many of my colleagues, you know, are very, very engaged in not just writing about changing the world, but actually engaged in doing it as well. And there's also colleagues there who don't do that stuff as well. They do what they're doing. I've also, like, within 2 years of coming back, I was head of the law school, so I got to manage the place, you know, and run it as well. And then, and in a sense, tried to apply some of this to managing the place and making it, you know, a welcoming environment for everyone. And I think very interested in widening participation as to how we can, you know, because one of the things that strikes me as odd about the current conversations about Queen's is, you know, we all take very seriously the need to be inclusive and to be a warm place for everyone. But I think the difficulty is, I suppose, people don't really understand what it is we do. I think sometimes it's just find in some of the, you know, rather heated debates that happen here, not just in relation to universities, but whether it's the judiciary, legal provider, just understanding the realities of what people do and their day job, and there's probably more work we could do on that. You know?
You were a member of the Senate for a while?
As part of the management stuff, I was on Senate, so I've been Like I've done serious senior management at Queen's and leadership stuff. Like one of the things, the projects that I was very heavily involved in, you'll know the old library at Queen's has now become a sort of new building, new law school building. You know, it's very much part of that project of making sure that happened. You know, that there was a better space really for students. And one of the things about Queen's in recent years is there has been more focus not just on the academic side, but the sort of physical architecture of the place, that it feels like a good place for people to be, you know.
Yeah.
So
it might surprise you that you were seen by many students as their senator, that you were seen to be the person who defended what students needed as opposed to what the university needed. Were you aware of that?
I think that
you were, of course.
Well, I think that just I've always, and I think people will say this about me, people who have problems with me and people who support what I do, I have always resolutely stood my ground in whatever context I've been in. And if I'm persuaded of an issue needs to, I stick to it in terms of, and sometimes that wins, sometimes that doesn't win, sometimes, and I'm conscious in many contexts, whether it's at Queen's or I was on the Human Rights Commission, I've been in other public bodies in life, I do stick to an issue and I will make the case. And I am conscious that during my life and career, I probably have annoyed people, but I think that's part of my role, you know.
I think there's a crossroads, yeah. And you've taken the road, yeah. The fork in that road. Yeah. So you could have been the academic with the cardigan, the holes in the elbows and the wooden
I've got
buttons.
that cardigan as well.
Have you?
Yeah.
I can't imagine you wearing it. And that would have been a very comfortable, very easy position for you to slip into. Yeah. And in many ways, I think that was academically, yeah. That's what you were supposed to do. Yeah. But nobody told you. So yeah. You go off and you fight every windmill you can find.
I think I totally respect people's decisions in terms of what they do, you know. So, and I have enormous admiration for my colleagues in the work that they've done. But personally, I've always been motivated to be involved with civil society, to try and not just teach about human rights and write about it, but try and make a difference. Sometimes I've made mistakes myself. Sometimes I could have done things differently. But I think that, you know, we sort of loosely talk about changing the world stuff, but I do remain optimistic and hopeful. And, you know, you have to try and keep going, you know, even in difficult times. You have to represent the values that you're writing about. There's no point to me writing a sort of 20,000 word footnoted article about human rights and equality values and not living that as well in context that you're in, you know.
I want to ask you one, maybe perhaps last heavy question. Yeah. I want to talk about the girls, yeah. just and about your love of marathons and all things light.
I'm so far outside my comfort zone at this point.
You talked about in recent times, and you've written about the human rights deficit that we face, and as I read it, it's not a prediction but a warning. Yeah. Is that a fair reading of what you're trying to get us to look at? I mean, us as society.
Look, it's crystal clear. All the evidence tells you that, particularly around socioeconomic inequality and marginalisation and deprivation, that's bad for stability in society. It's bad for society. So absolutely, yeah.
But is it too late? Can we change it? Can we do things with it? Can we come back? Can we embrace? For instance, we don't have a human rights charter effectively. You know, we have the theory of it, but have we missed the boat, as they say in West Belfast?
No, absolutely not. Like a number of things there, work we've been doing about people on socioeconomic rights. People want change, right? So positive here remains that majority of people want serious change in relation to socioeconomic issues here. Yes, we don't have a Bill of Rights, but we do have human rights and equality guarantees. We need to make sure and hold on to them. I think there's a big appetite for change. It's finding ways to unlock that and give that expression. But no, I don't think people should give up at all. I think people should be optimistic. We're in difficult times. We've been in worse times here. I think, in fact, we're probably really on the island as a whole on the brink of something very interesting. That's always going to generate a reaction the other way. But I think I would rather focus on the sort of positive in that. And I suppose the question, the longer term here, is around, institutions that stand in the way of what people want and what people clearly want. Where does that all lead eventually? But no, I think people need to remain hopeful and optimistic. I think most people are, and I think the desire and appetite for change in the area that I work in is huge and massive. So.
When you're not being a professor and you're not charging those windmills, which you seem to be able to find everywhere, I have to say.
What does that make me if I'm charging windmills here?
Well, no, I mean that in a very good way. I mean, you talked about some of the misunderstandings around you, and they are misunderstandings, I have to say. But what I was going to go on to ask you, when you're not fighting battles, and there are plenty of battles to fight, you're a daddy, a father. So, do you enjoy that? I suppose you can't say you don't, but do you find it difficult trying to fit that into all the other stuff that you're doing?
No, I very much enjoy it, Anya and Cara to, 12 and 14 sort of keep you grounded and focused. But also, I find it really, it's a really positive sort of watching them develop their own personalities, their own views in the world, telling me to wise up frequently when I need it. But also worry for them, about, like in my day, if you wanted to talk to anybody, you'd pick up a phone, or write or something. When you went out, people didn't know. The world that they inhabit of constantly on all the time, of social media, of phones, of all that stuff is a very different world from... A
harder world, do you think?
I think it's the world, first of all, given the sort of patriarchal nature of the world that we inhabit, it's already very difficult for women and girls in the world that we're in. But I think it's a better place than it was historically. But I think particularly for girls of their age, the pressures, the challenges, the difficulties, without being in any way a sort of Luddite, in terms of trying to be protective around that. They're just different sort of challenges, to try and really make them feel they can talk to us really in terms of what's going on in the world. But also, you think about they're growing up in a very different world than I grew up in. So it's
certainly that I grew up in. I don't know about yourself. And I find, I have grandchildren. I find that people seem to grow up in leaps rather than in inches. They grow up so quick. They're nursery school one day, and they're driving buses the next day or whatever they're doing. Yeah,
I think it's time and time speeding up. Like I find as I get older, like just the years going by very, very quickly, and just trying not to miss that experience. Like I'm very, very robust about. Again, although you've dragged me into all these private conversations now today, like I'm very, very protective of private space, of family time and all of that, and making sure we do have that space that's protected from all this stuff, because there's aspects of this society are problematic. Like
absolutely.
You need to protect all that. But I'm conscious, like there'll be no time before they're having conversations about university, where they're going and leaving home. We also have a Labradoodle called Clover last year, so we've got Clover to contend with. She's
the boss in the house.
New addiction to that. Absolutely.
Yeah, I know. I listen. I have a dog at home. I know that feeling. I want to move off, and I want to keep on moving, because time's is no friend of mine or yours for that matter. How do you relax? I'm told you're a great walker. Is that true?
I don't drive, so I have to walk in one sense in terms of anybody.
Why do you not drive?
I don't know. I've never, and then I haven't done it. So
I can't drive.
Not something I'm proud
of.
But
it's not. Is it a statement? Is it just a choice?
Oh yeah, it's a profound statement about environmental activism.
I'm leading you into these answers. Yeah.
It's a profound. No, it's just it's something I'm not that proud of in terms of. So in terms of, like I do a lot of running now, which I think I mentioned the last 10 years or so. When I did a very intense job as head of law school, and then that sort of stopped, and then I ended up doing a lot of running, in terms of just it's a good sort of thing to get into, is what I said. The last 10 years I've done a lot of that. But I don't know, I don't have yourself, when you have children, that's what matters. And so I've lived my life and all that stuff, so.
And you're a compulsive reader?
I've heard you have, like in the job I'm in, I have to be.
Do you read for enjoyment or for work? Do you enjoy it equally?
Well, like everybody, I've got a massive pile I'm a big fiction reader. Like that's the way I lose myself in.
Good, that's great.
Books. So because there's not much else really that can take you from ruminating about the world into somebody else's space. But like everybody else, I've got a big pile of. Like I've got 100 times more books than I'll ever read in my lifetime, so...
My mother, just as a quotation about reading, my mother was a mill worker, learned to read and write older rather than younger. Was a part-timer in the mill. And she had a phrase about reading or writing, but reading in particular. And she said, when you can read, it's a magic carpet. You can be anywhere. It will take you anywhere. So just as you say, it allows you to that release.
Yeah, no, I think so. But it's also, good to keep engaged,
The last question, well, not the last, but coming towards the last questions, you'll be glad to hear. The human rights battle that you're referring to, and the rights of identity and the rights of to be where you are and who you are, has led others to become into confrontation with you, and it's confrontation over emails and social media and all of that. It's preposterous, and I know of some of them. And you talked about standing your ground. Is it hurtful? Does it affect you? How do you deal with it?
I suppose the first thing is really to make clear from the start of just always offering people the opportunity to come and talk really about stuff. Like one of the things that I spoke in 2019 about, why go to my boss at Queen's about me? Why not just come and talk to me about it? And so really again, in terms of here, just open invitation, and my contact details are on, just get in touch. I'm happy to talk about clarifying any issues. I think one of the dispiriting things in relation to a range of people, it's not just, there's been this stuff this year about networks and all, just sort of like
nonsense.
Very odd stuff that is, just engage, talk. There's an open invitation to join these conversations, but so much of it is very personalised and ad hominem. And I think that's problematic, because me and others, we work on very detailed documents, for example. So if there's a substantive thing that we're saying that's wrong, just let us know, But if there's anything about substance, engage. But I think I do find personalised stuff in the world of social media can be an appalling place. But I do think, I want to understand where that's coming from. I think it comes from a sphere of sort of space of insecurity, of fear and anxiety. And I do genuinely want to understand that. And I think one of the things that all of us engaged in the constitutional discussion, how can we provide security and assurances and guarantees that it won't take away that anxiety, but that makes absolutely clear to people that nobody wants a replication of what's happened in the past. Want to make people feel safe and secure and whatever comes next, and understand all the fears and anxieties. So one of the things at the moment is in the area of human rights and equality and identity, and how can people like me work on things that will give people assurance that they feel safe and secure, that it won't overcome all the anxieties, but that will make clear that this is coming out of a good place. It's not coming out of any sense that want anything other than to do things differently than happened in the past. Because we started this discussion, a conversation around issues of dignity, humiliation and disrespect, That applies to when you work in human rights.
Everything. Yeah.
It's everybody. You know, you don't want anybody to feel humiliated, and you want people to be respected. But there's work to do in making sure people hear that message, because in the society, like, let's be people. There are people in the society that we live in that seem to love division and conflict, that seem to prefer caricature and stereotype to nuance and complexity, and who seem to be candid, get a kick out of winding people up. And I think we have to work hard at overcoming that to ensure that people see and hear what is actually being said, rather than the sort of label that attaches to people.
This is the promise. This is the very last question, and it only requires a one-line answer.
I can't give one-line answers.
Well,
as you
no,
can see
you can't. I have to say you've been very good. We've been talking for an hour. Mightn't feel like an hour, maybe feels like 3 hours, but it's. And you mentioned that early days of being a student in England, and you mentioned your mummy wanting you to come home in the letters. So if you were writing now, that letter on a one line, would it be, I'm doing okay, I want to come home, this is Kat, what would you write to her?
Well, one thing I want to say in relation to that, something I thought about, my mum and dad used to every week parcel up and send me the Derry Journal. Right, the Derry Journal always used to arrive every week, and I thought about that, you know, the amount of love and attention that would have went into those things, that when you're younger,
and the effort.
You don't, you know, sometimes I think when you're a younger person, you don't really appreciate the tenderness and the care and affection that goes into things like that. I remember even getting on, you know, the bus from Boys. Ma used to stuff things in my bag without me knowing. You know, you'd open them and find the sort of butter and everything, and the bus sort of melting on the bus, things there. But I think ultimately, like, without being trying to be overly sentimental about it, like, everything I've done is in homage to them, right? So now my mum and dad are no longer with us, but like many people here, the intention is your life is a monument to them, right? And to their experiences, to people in Derry, to demonstrate. And that's why some of the discussions at the moment I find so very difficult. It's to say ultimately, this is all for you. This is all for, and that we represent something that's much better than what happened here in the past. And
those words, which are not academic, and they're not from academia, thank you. You've been a wonderful guest. And I hope you don't get divorced as a result of this interview.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.